We are fascinated with our mortality, and strategies for extending it have been whispered about in quiet corners of the web as an unusual hobby for the ultra-rich, and even in secret military labs for decades. But recently, 2 world leaders got caught talking about immortality, and suddenly, discussions about living until 150 started making headlines. It's called biohacking, or transhumanism. Ultimately, it's the search for longevity, or in the case of an extremely select few, immortality. Science says no matter how good medicine becomes, the human body has an age limit, somewhere around 120 to 150 years. They cite things like the buildup of age-related organ damage and chronic disease. Some parts of the world push back on that theory, where mysterious blue zones produce high numbers of people with exceptionally long lives. But for some, even that may not be enough. Old world explorers, alchemists, and spiritual practitioners have been working on extreme anti-aging techniques for millennia. Did they really crack the code of everlasting life? Why do people in Okinawa, Japan live past 100 with ease? What's the deal with today's biohacking? And what's the real difference between the old search for immortality and the new? Join me as we unravel some of these questions and more, and enter the Codex Legendarium. I'm Shelby Melanson. It doesn't take much to realize that our society is obsessed with youth. The global market for anti-aging products was worth over $150 billion just as of last year. Health and fitness trackers were worth even more than that, sitting at $60 billion, and both of them are going to skyrocket in the next 5 years. For some people, minimizing fine lines and staying healthy, though, isn't quite enough. What if the goal is to stay healthy, but for as long as humanly or even not so humanly possible? The idea is generally called biohacking, with subcategories called DIY biology, garage biology, or even grinder. It's all about optimizing the body's performance. And if that word sounds kind of techie to you, there's a reason. It starts out simple enough. Things like intermittent fasting, sleep tracking, and taking supplements. The next level starts to get a little more intense. Things like taking prescription drugs to improve brain function, exposing the body to extreme cold during cryotherapy, hopping into near-infrared saunas for cellular repair and detox, de-stressing in sensory deprivation float tanks, getting IV drips with extra nutrients, or even sitting on a mat that pulses electromagnetic fields. As you can imagine, this is where things start getting expensive. Because of it, the more dedicated biohacks have become a hobby for the ultra-rich. Some have even opened their own therapy clubs across the US, Europe, and Australia. And yes, the wait lists are long and the membership prices are sky high. All of that is intense, although still in the realm of normal, right? From here, get ready to go down the rabbit hole. Something to pay attention to. This whole philosophy looks at the human body as something akin to, say, a computer program, aka something with bugs that need to be patched in newer versions, or something that can be hacked to achieve peak performance. That belief only gets stronger the deeper this gets. The more controversial side of biohacking starts getting invasive. A quick disclaimer, I'm not going to talk about names here. Feel free to look them up if you want, but I'm just here to talk about what's happening, not necessarily who is doing it. Companies have emerged selling home genetic engineering classes and bio kits to go with them. Now, the kits do not encourage people to experiment on their own DNA, but they do offer the same biomaterial and chemicals used by drug companies in clinical trials. And a few of the most enthusiastic biohackers have already taken that leap, including the founder of one of those companies. He says he's the first person ever to inject himself with gene editing technology called CRISPR. Another famous biohacker has waged a full-on war against aging, and his ultimate goal? Just don't die. His most famous strategy for this was getting blood plasma transfusions from his 18-year-old son. But he stopped that later on since apparently it wasn't helping. Now, instead, he removes all of the blood from his body periodically, separates out the plasma, and replaces that plasma with a blend of proteins. Biohackers called grinders take all of this a level even deeper. And here's where the not-so-human part we talked about kinda comes in. Grinders are all about what they call augmentation. Basically, body modifications that start to blur the lines between human and cyborg. One US biohacker got NFC chips implanted in his fingertips that can open his car door. Besides that, a microchip in his arm monitors his body temperature. And as for his more extreme modifications, back in 2013, he had magnets implanted into his ears that work like headphones. And after that, he implanted tubes into his shins that would highly reinforce his leg strength, but he had to have them removed later because of complications. Biohacking on this level has a lot of crossover with something called transhumanism. That term has been around since the 1940s, and the people who believe in it basically want to enhance the human body and mind with technology. But besides making someone smarter and stronger, one of its ultimate goals is to extend life and even achieve immortality. This is where we get into the deepest levels of, let's call it, extreme anti-aging methods. What if there was a way to use new, younger cells to revitalize aging or damaged ones? That's exactly what something called stem cell therapy is trying to do, and here's the thing about stem cells. They have two abilities that make them really special. One, they can become any other kind of cell, and two, they replicate. They're the reason babies can grow from a small clump of genetic material into a fully formed human with 200 kinds of cells. They're also the reason why the human body knows how to heal itself when something gets damaged. So what if these almost magically transformative cells could be used to patch up other things, like genetic defects, Alzheimer's and spinal cord injuries, or age? Research into this started making waves in the early 2000s, mostly because it focused on embryonic stem cell technology. And the source of those cells posed some ethical issues. Not everyone is a fan of extracting cells from human embryos that were created using IVF. These days, methods like genetic reprogramming are being studied instead. That way, biomaterial like adult skin cells can be voluntarily donated and reverse engineered into stem cells instead. Okay, what does that have to do with longevity? New research from Harvard and Boston Children's Hospital actually put this to the test. They found that transplanting a type of young stem cell into old mice actually made them live almost 10% longer. It worked by tuning up the mice's immune systems and making them physically stronger. But here's the wild part. It actually made the mice younger, literally. Biologists use something called epigenetic age to measure how old something is on the molecular level, which can be different from the amount of time that something's been alive. And that age is what got younger in the stem cell transplanted mice. Just in case that wasn't enough, the next-gen versions of this might be something called nanomedicine. The short version of the idea is this. Once the human body hits a certain age, usually around 100 years old, no matter how healthy you are, the body just starts deteriorating faster than it can heal itself. But what if there was another way? What if we had the technology to build minuscule nanobots, robots, that could enter the body and fix cells faster than they age? That's what some researchers suggest could start happening as early as the 2030s. Personally, this just makes me think of gray goo, a theory about a potential global catastrophe where nanobots basically unravel everything and end life as you know it. So, no big deal. Let me know if you want me to talk about that in a future episode. Here's the thing, stem cell technology is in its extreme early stages still, and nanobots are still a ways off. Maybe thankfully. Seriously, yikes. So what about those wealthy and powerful few that don't want to wait that long? This is where things get dark. Consider this your warning. It's one thing when an individual person wants to try things out on their own body. But what happens when someone who has control over others decides they want to stay in control, and that they're okay with taking from others or even taking their lives to do it? In September of this year, 2 world leaders had a conversation about advanced biotech and organ transplantation and how it might be able to extend human life to 150 years or more. Now, the idea of a leader, or worse, a dictator, seeking eternal life already poses some issues. But that's not the worst of it.
本世纪呢，可能未来可以活到150岁。
The comment came from the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. And as for the method of choice for elite CCP members looking to obtain eternal life, by stealing it. It being the organs from living people. Yes, as inhuman and horrifying as it sounds, this is very real. This is a regime that's been accused of harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience and members of religious and spiritual groups for decades, while they are still alive. Reports estimate tens of thousands are killed to order for their organs every year, mostly to supply the Chinese regime's extensive and highly lucrative transplant market. And the people being killed? Prisoners of conscience, religious believers, and dissidents. According to reports by investigative journalist Ethan Gutmann, international human rights lawyer David Matas, and former member of Canadian Parliament David Kilgour, the majority of organ harvesting victims are believed to be members of a spiritual meditation practice called Falun Gong. There are a lot more reports backing this up as well. The idea of stealing organs to extend human life is nothing new for the CCP either. A project called the 981 Health Project for Top Leaders was launched back in 2006. It's run by China's military hospitals, mostly the military's 301 hospital in Beijing, and its sole purpose is to develop new science to extend longevity for China's most elite Communist Party members. A quick side note, Soviet Russia also has a long and strange fascination with extending life, to the point that they've been accused of fudging their census data to make it seem like way more Russians live to be 100 than actually do, as a power and status symbol. But what would an episode about immortality be without some weird Soviet science projects, right? A Russian writer was actually the first biohacker to attempt longevity via blood transfusions back in the 1920s. Others wrote about some other weird ideas, like creating absolute egalitarianism via blood sharing and a collective form of life that could transcend death. That includes reanimating the dead so they could join this hive mind too. Actual Soviet doctors apparently came up with equally weird theories, like one from 1934 that detailed a potion for extending life. All you need to make it is the spleens and bone marrow of 3 young men accidentally killed within the last day. Grind that up and inject that into a rat. Let it sit for 5 days. After that, take the animal's blood, inject it into yourself, and boom, extended life. So they say. Joseph Stalin was apparently fascinated with this particular idea. Even today, Russia's health ministry is still at it in various forms, with reports saying research institutes were asked last year to develop, quote, medical products aimed at reducing the burden of cellular aging. Yeah, anyways. Okay, I don't know about you, but after all that, I need something a little more peaceful to think about. We just covered a lot of different kinds of efforts to find everlasting life. But despite all that work, what if natural methods are still better? Some corners of the world are already swimming in centenarians, just like the residents of Okinawa, Japan. The island is one of the world's blue zones, mysterious places where people seem to live exceptionally long lives, often well past 100. More specifically, a report from 2016 defines them as places where people live to 100 years old 10 times more often than the average in the US. Besides Okinawa, they are Loma Linda, California in the USA, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Sardinia, Italy, and Ikaria, Greece. Studies going back to 1999 also zeroed in on some of these places individually. And believe it or not, even the world's oldest encyclopedia talks about this. Pliny's Natural History was written during the Roman Empire around 77 AD, just under 2,000 years ago. It describes census data from, quote, the 8th region of Italy, including more than 50 people 100 years old, at least 2 people 125 years old, 4 at 130 years old, and 3 more at 140. So who knows? Maybe Italy has had the secret sauce for a while. A whole host of researchers went to try and figure out what makes these blue zones so special. And as it turns out, despite being scattered around the world, they have 9 specific things in common. So according to them, here's the secret to a long life. Get some exercise, but as a natural part of your life, not just going to the gym. Do something to cut down on stress. Take a nap, pray, or embrace mindfulness for a few minutes. Eat until your stomach is 80% full, not until you're stuffed. And eat earlier in the day, and eat more plants than meat. Enjoy a glass of wine regularly, but just a glass. Put family first, keep grandparents, parents, and kids close, and cultivate a happy relationship. Be part of a faith-based community. Any denomination will work. The research says this alone will give you an extra 14 years of life expectancy. The final two are my personal favorites. Keep your inner tribe close. In Okinawa, people form groups of 5 close friends that stay committed to each other for life. Tons of other research backs this up too. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services says loneliness can actually be more harmful than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And finally, have purpose in your life. In Japanese, it's called Ikigai. In Costa Rica, it's plan de vida. Translated, it means why I wake up in the morning. And having a good answer might just add 7 years to your life, according to science. Something else interesting, if you look at the top 10 oldest people currently verified by science, they're all women. And the top 10 oldest who are currently still alive, also all women. So, sorry guys, I guess. We've covered the modern, the unnatural, and the natural. But what about the ancient? You'd think that with all this biohacking and scientific innovation going on, the human lifespan would now be longer than it's ever been. And that's true, mostly. Infant mortality has gone way down, and data shows that for most of the world, life expectancy is around the late 70s, all the way up to more than 80. That's around double what it was 2 centuries ago. But if you think that's a big jump, there are also some interesting stories from a few hundred or even a few thousand years ago that talk about some unexpected lifespans. A disclaimer here, the stories we're going to talk about are very, very old, and historical records from certain points of history are a bit disputed. However, and this is just my personal take, just because something may be difficult to prove or seem like it challenges what we currently understand, doesn't mean there isn't still wisdom in it. So take this mythology as you will. First, let's go all the way back to ancient China for a legend about a monk named Zhong Gua Lao, one of the 8 immortals of Taoism. Already off to a great start with that name, right? He's most famous for riding his donkey backwards across China. But in one legend, Zhong Gua Lao saw the emperor capture an unusual deer. After spotting it, he shouted that the deer was immortal, having lived for 1,000 years. When asked to explain, he said he had captured the very same animal during a hunt with a previous emperor. As for proof, he said that emperor had attached a small copper plaque to the deer's left antler. And sure enough, there it was. He said that 852 years had passed since that hunting trip. And when the emperor ordered his historians to investigate, they actually said it was correct. The story comes from a record called the Old Book of Tang, the first ever classical historic work about China's Tang Dynasty. The book says Zhong Gua Lao was a real person. If ancient China is a little too far from home for you, how about the Old Testament? In Christianity and Judaism, a figure named Methuselah was said to be 969 years old. He's actually one of many long-lived figures in the Hebrew Bible, and even his grandson, you might know him as Noah, is on the list. He reached the ripe old age of 600 as of the time of the flood, and 950 when he died. And on the young end, Moses passed away at 120 in view of the Promised Land. Besides religious figures, quite a few kings of the old world followed the long life trend too. The first legendary emperor of Japan lived until 126, while another about a century and a half later lived to 137. That's according to the Kojiki, a book of Japanese historic legends. It's the same story with China's legendary emperors. The most famous, the Yellow Emperor, is said to have lived for 118 years. The first king of Vietnam lived even longer, hitting 127. And if you go way back, the founder of Korea's first dynasty was said to live for an insane 1,900 years. Something else to keep in mind, there are a truly unbelievable number of these stories. The ones we mentioned here are just a small handful. Otherwise, we'd be here for a week. Whatever you believe about these old stories, I couldn't help but notice something while researching for this video. Whether you look at our modern era or ancient times, there have always been methods and people searching for eternal life. Going back in time, we have stories about the search for the fountain of youth, the Holy Grail, ambrosia, the immortality-giving food of the Greek gods. Not to mention figures like Nicholas Flamel and his alchemical elixir of life. In the East, spiritual practices taught immortal alchemy as a part of self-cultivation, or the improvement of both the body and the soul. But if you compare the righteous kings of ancient times, legendary figures from the Tang Dynasty, and religious leaders in the Bible, with today's biohacking, body modifications, and at worst, organ replacements, something just feels wrong. And that's not to say ancient times didn't have a few weird ones too. I mean, some legends in Japan talk about eating mermaids to gain immortality. While China's famous novel Journey to the West describes a demon king who tries to eat the main character, a Buddhist monk, for the same reason. But back to the point here, there are some key differences. The old stories, and even today's blue zones like Okinawa, all talk about bringing positivity into the world. Whether that means fostering your community and caring for others, being an upright king who carried dynasties into prosperity, or a spiritual figure whose story has inspired countless people to choose good over evil. The modern methods, organ transplants and nanobot injections, not so much. Listen, I'm very far from anti-tech. Quite the opposite, honestly. But from the ethics issues to the fact that we just don't know what could happen, where's the line for going too far? Is the human body the same as a computer program, just something to be patched until all the bugs are worked out of it? Or is there more to our design? In my eyes, playing God with our own bodies and trying to achieve something that maybe isn't meant for us humans, maybe isn't the best path. Because after all, would you want to live forever? To see the rise and fall of societies and watch everything you know fade away until time ceases to mean something? Personally, I wouldn't. What do you think? Do you think living until 150 is on the horizon for us? And if it is, would you be first in line to try it, or last? Are blue zones legit? And what about the ancient stories? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into mysteries, myths, culture, and science, drop us a like and subscribe. Thank you.